All right, hello everybody. Welcome today to today's session. Is 2021 the demise of the workspace? The never-ending debate on remote, hybrid, or in-office working. In today's session, we're going to go over the fact that companies are bringing employees back into the office now, and that's going to require some very careful planning, not only in ensuring that health and safety requirements are being met, but then also that in this post-pandemic landscape, that the needs of employees, both mental and emotional, are being met and taken care of by companies. So just a quick item of housekeeping. We'd love to have an interactive session today. So if you've got any questions, comments, or remarks, feel free to drop those in the Q&A section or right there in the chat box. I'm Michael Mazzarella. I'm the Director of Partnerships here at Proxyclick, but more importantly, I'm joined by our three panelists here today, and I'll introduce them very quickly here. So first, we're joined by Tracy Brower. Tracy is the Principal in Applied Research and Consulting over at Steelcase. I'm also joined by Pilar Orti, who is the Director of Virtual Not Distant. And lastly, we're joined by Dr. Chris Mullen, who is the Executive Director at the Workforce Institute. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and looking forward to today's session. So to start things off, as populations are getting vaccinated and many more countries are preparing for a return to, I suppose, the old normal, companies are kind of forced in this paradigm of having to choose one sort of working arrangement to settle on: remote, hybrid, or 100% back in the office. So bearing that in mind, a question to everybody, and we'll start with Tracy first. Should they let their workers stay at home? Should they bring everybody back into the office, or naturally, is there a solution in between?
It's the $6 million question right now, isn't it? Thank you so much for having us all. Thanks for having me. I think that companies are going to have to make this decision based on their particular employee population, based on the nature of the work and the value that they offer to customers, based on their market. We have a belief, and I think when we look at the research, that being face-to-face has some really significant advantages in terms of culture, in terms of engagement, in terms of visibility and career growth for employees, in terms of our mental and cognitive and physical health. So I think it will be an individual decision, but I think the most important thing is to know what are the questions we need to ask ourselves, more than is there one right answer. How do we think about the dynamic tension between individual and organizational needs? How do we manage the needs for short-term and long-term and the learning that we'll do over time? How do we make sure we're meeting customer needs and meeting the needs of the talent revolution that we know is upon us? So those are some thoughts in terms of an early kickoff.
Yeah, that's great. And Pilar, are you putting your money on any one of those arrangements in particular, or do you feel that hybrid is the way that people are going?
Anything that has choice in it, I don't care what it is. If everyone chooses to go back to the office, if everyone chooses to stay away from the office, whether it's from home or remote, for me, choice is the most important thing. And I also like to add that let's not rush into this. We had to rush to the all remote because we had no choice. And I also think whether it's helpful to think about this in two phases. So what's going to happen over the next couple of years, it's not what's going to stick, because we are now reacting against what we've been going through for the last year. So yes, everyone wants to go back to the office to see their friends, their colleagues, but maybe at some point they go, well, that's very good, but actually now that I'm settled, now that everything is open, now that I can go back to structuring the life how I would like it to be, I might want something different. So I wonder whether it's also helpful to think about it in those two phases, the now, the next couple of years, and then something more sustainable.
Yeah. And Chris, somebody gives you those three choices very directly. What is your answer to them, or how do you go back on a question like that?
Yeah, I think if I were given just those three choices, hybrid would obviously be my answer. But taking into what Tracy and Pilar had to say, choice needs to be imperative. And Tracy, when she talks about the dynamic play, you cannot make a broad brush approach as a company. You just can't. To Tracy's point, you need to figure out the questions you should be asking, not just your leaders and managers, but also your employees. We need to listen to our employees. And it needs to be a personalized decision for both the company and the individual. I like what Pilar also had to say about the 1 to 3 years. I also break it down into seasons, because what I'm starting to see is it depends where you are in the world, how open your country or your area, your region is. But here in the US, we're fairly open now. We're really open now compared to the rest of the world. And even for the folks who want to go back to the office, I'm not necessarily sure they will right now in this season of summer. People are not ready to work now. People are like, if I can stay at home, even though I love the office, if I can stay at home just for the summer and get more flexibility, I really think people right now where I am, and I think this holds true around the world, is that folks are so tired of being pent up, either remote working or having to go to the office because they were essential employees. What they really want is to stop the change for a minute. Just give me a month. Give me 2 months with no change. I just want to relax, do my job, and then live my life, because now I can see friends and family. I mean, vacation around the world is going through the roof if you can travel. People are like, it is hard to get a rental home, a vacation home, a hotel right now, because there's a lot of extra income that some folks have been saving, those who are blessed to do that, and they're ready to go. And even folks who are not want to take the time off to take a deep breath and see the family and relatives that could be around the corner that they haven't seen in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's the whole question of season is really something that people should be taking into account. And then, going back to, if we think about sort of our opening statements, something that that really struck me as interesting is asking questions. So, kind of digesting this topic a little bit and getting it started in the right way. So, I guess, Chris, I'll start with you first. What are some of those questions that companies and organizations need to be asking themselves to make some sense of this in the beginning?
I think we have to really start really basic. You have to understand your culture and the dynamic and demographics of your employee base. So can your employees, if you're in a tech industry, can all of your employees work remotely? If you're in manufacturing, you're going to have folks that have to be on the line, on the floor. So we have to ask that question is, who can have this option? And if they can't, what options can we give each group? Because we all understand this, I think, in business, is everyone wants everything to be equal. It cannot be equal. Equitable versus equal is what I talk about. So if you can give your knowledge workers the ability to work from home, however many days a week, that's the question. How many days a week do they have? Then the question for your employees where presence is required is, what flexibility can we give them knowing that they have to be here to work? And some of that might be shift swapping. Maybe they have a say in their schedule, when they start, when they stop, things like that. And it goes back to the choice. It's providing that choice. So there's some of the questions I would start to ask is, what are our demographics? What are their needs? I would ask the employees the same questions I would ask leadership every day of the week, so I can listen to both sides. What are managers' needs? And then start to go from there.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and I think this is, this is something that you speak about, but it's something that we should keep in the back of our minds. Is, as we discuss this, we're not just talking about office workers. There's a whole there are several different types of personas and worker types that we should be bearing in mind. I think it's an excellent point that you make. Tracy, any sort of in your questioning or in your developing of questions on this subject, do you have any that differ from what Chris is asking? Are there any questions that you would add on to that?
Yeah, I love the questions that you're recommending, Chris. I totally agree. And I think that another couple that are critical to think about are just the whole talent market that a company is in. You know, there's a study that suggests that 40% of employees are planning to leave their current employer once lockdowns lift. There's another study where employers are saying, 29% of employers are saying that they're going to increase the number of headcount that they have. So they're it's an amazing talent revolution with new flexibility choices and options for employees and organizations who need to hire and need to attract and retain. So I think part of the question is, what's your talent market and what are the ways that you're going to best engage people, develop them, get their levels of commitment and interest? What are the ways that you're going to help people develop their social capital and their relationships? Because that will be part of what makes it sticky. In addition to how will you generate a sense of purpose and line of sight from my work to your work to the customer's work that, again, will engage people. So I think those are really critical questions to ask. And I think the other questions to ask have to do with people's work modes. Sometimes it's not about job description, it's about work mode or about preference. And I think we also need to ask questions about accountability and results, because it's really fair that organizations can set some expectations and parameters and want people to be in the office because of the desire for us to have a strong culture and have shared social identity and give people flexibility. So it's that balance. But for me, there's a question there about the scale and the accountability. We can't meet every single person's need individually. We want to respect and ask questions about their needs and preferences and work modes, and we need to balance that with scale. So those are some of the few additional questions I would.
It's an excellent point. We can never make everybody 100% happy, and we can never have processes that are going to fit into everybody's own personal situations. But there needs.
Michael, that's not an excuse to broad brush a decision in a policy. Right? It's got to be in the middle somewhere, because people will hear what you just said and go, "Well, then I'm just going to make a decision for everybody." That's not what we're saying. It's got to be an intentional, thoughtful decision where you get data from all points, your employees, your managers, things like that. So I agree that, yes, it can't be individualized, but it also shouldn't be a broad brush. Saying everybody's got to put their butt in a seat in the office is not the answer. If you do that, what Tracy said is right. You're going to lose all your talent. I worked for a company where we were all remote for the most part all year, and we still hit number 6 on Fortune's top 100 places in the world to work. It can be done, but you got to be intentional. Pilar, sorry.
No, because I'm replying to what you're saying. So in addition to everything, of course, that Tracy and Chris have been saying, however, I do disagree with Chris a little bit. And it's that if a company does have very good reasons, I don't disagree with the intentionality. Yeah. It's got to be intention, and it's got to be about knowing what the reasons are for mandating location or for offering only one location. And because what I'm hoping is that we're going to see such a broad spectrum of companies. And yes, the ones that want you to go into this particular office every day are going to miss out on a whole wider pool of people, but they will attract a certain kind of people. And if they have a culture that they are convinced can only function in that way, or it could be the work that needs to be done in the company, then that's fine. But definitely I think the overarching question is, what do we want? What kind of company do we want to be? And what kind of people do we want to attract? So I think, as well as Chris, are you going to say something before I move on?
Yeah, I was going to. So for the people who don't know, Pilar and I already know each other. We've been on her podcast together. So her and I love to chat about this. Pilar, what would you then say? Because I've been in this situation. I actually left the job because I was working from home one day a week, and after a whole year,
are we losing Chris, or is it just me?
I think, I'm having some difficulty hearing Chris as well.
Oh, he had the. Okay.
But they're very fortunate, because if his internet connection is a bit laggy, that allows me to jump in with my point. So I can totally interrupt here.
Great, go for it.
So here we're getting into a bit of a chicken and the egg kind of situation. So if, on one side, we're saying an organization can say we are 100% in the office company, and then the people that we attract must be people that have that kind of personality or have that as their kind of ideal working scenario. The other way to look at it is, we are a group of human beings, and we need to come to some sort of decision on, what our working status is going to be as a reflection of that collection of people that we are. So, in that sense, is it fair for organizations to just say we are this kind of company and this is the way that we're going to do things, or is there really a lack of insight in taking that kind of approach?
So it depends where it's coming from, and also it's about whether it's trial and error. It's not about going this. Everyone has to come to the. I think also in a way, and back to I think what Tracy was saying earlier, and Chris, it's about flexibility and how much flexibility you can take as an organization, as a cultural organization, and as individuals. So if you can't take any flexibility, then you can't offer any flexibility. Whether that puts you in a corner, that's a different story. But
yeah, I would just add, I think you're right that flexibility is going to be the name of the game. And I think it's probably less about choosing one end of the continuum or the other. Our data shows that 5% of companies are going to say, nope, we're going to be all remote. 72% of companies are going to be somewhere in the middle, and the rest will be all in the office. But I think that there are pros and cons to all remote and all in the office. And that is what we need to be really cognizant about. Like if people aren't in the office, it's going to be harder for us to really nurture our culture because there's so much about face-to-face. If people aren't in the office, it will be really harder to engage people as deeply, for them to develop relationships as deeply. On the other hand, flexibility is terrific for things like work life and quality of life. But getting out of the house is also really good for variety and kind of what we need from a brain and a neuroscience standpoint in terms of stimulation. It can also be really helpful for boundaries. You know, everything isn't mushed together quite as much as it is today. So I think there are definitely both pros and cons. And a hybrid model is helpful with more choice based on individuals, based on leadership, based on team processes, and based on that intentionality that Chris talks about. Hybrid seems like it helps us to kind of stretch across that continuum a little bit more intentionally and to give us more of a both and in terms of choice. Choices for employees, choices for leaders, choices for teams, choices for the organization based on what we're trying to accomplish as a business and based on that balancing that we need to do between employee needs and organization needs and the equitable and fairness that we want to impose as well.
And I'm going to pick on one point that you kind of mentioned in the middle of that there. So with the countless articles, podcasts, and content out there on this subject, I've seen relatively little that takes a psychological, sociological, or anthropological approach to all of this. And the question I kind of ask myself is, is human interaction fundamentally something that happens face to face, or having technology in between that is that completely acceptable, or are there challenges associated with that? So, no worries if people don't have any extensive experience with this, but for that particular question, have you in your own experiences seen any evidence to that point one way or another?
Yes, absolutely. I can start on that one, and then others can jump in. My PhD is in sociology and the sociology of work. And what I like to say is that work is fundamentally social. Whether we're introverts or extroverts, we may have different needs for more or less time with people. But our social needs are absolutely critical to us as humans. When we have more face-to-face interaction, we have lower levels of morbidity, we have lower levels of mortality, we have greater levels of mental health. We as human beings need each other. And we can connect virtually, and thank goodness for technology, but it doesn't allow us the same level of feelings of proximity. And proximity is the #1 determinant of relationships, sociologically speaking. Obviously, there are lots of other variables. Proximity can be either real or perceived, but the more that we are together, the more familiarity we have. Familiarity also tends to lead toward more acceptance. And so we do have a fundamental need for each other. Some of that can be mitigated by technology for sure, but some of our face-to-face need as humans is absolutely irreplaceable and irreducible. And work is a fundamental way that we get that need met and that we get that social identity. So just a sociological perspective. Your question.
Tracy, let's be real. I'm tired of staring at myself all day on camera.
Yes, because
the hide yourself,
right? It brings up, well, sociologically too, it brings up a level of vigilance, right? Like I'm looking at myself, I'm looking at others, I can't read nonverbal. My mirror neurons aren't able to sync up nonverbally with others. Absolutely, we're tired of looking at ourselves on camera.
I actually, I saw one of my colleagues for the first time since October the other day, and it was probably the most
can I hop in?
unnerving experience I've had in a while. Yeah, Pilar, absolutely.
Sorry, I don't know if I have a lag. I think I do. Great.
Just a little bit, but I can hear you now.
So, yeah, okay, I'll slow down a bit. So there's a couple of things. I think that there are quite a few organizations, of course, we know that are 100% remote and colleagues feel very close to each other. They will meet every now and then in person, maybe a few times every few months. And being in person with someone else does strengthen that. It could also be worse than if you're just away from each other. I think what we have to remember is that all that human contact that we need as well, some people don't get it at work and some people don't need to get it at work. And of course, this is where, and we know this, that the experience of remote work of the last year is not the experience of remote work we could have, because we haven't been able to have all that social stuff. So I think hybrid is actually, when you talk to the remote work advocates, or the people who've really been looking at how best to do this, hybrid is the worst of both worlds, because when you're all online, you have a common thing, and when you're all in person, you have a common space. Hybrid gives us more option, but we have to work harder than that. And I think that we've also got the chance to really understand, what am I getting from you when I'm with you? And what can I get from you when I'm far away from you? And then see and navigate. And of course, the problem is the diversity that we have as people within that. So maybe that's another question that we need to really understand. I think
definitely another
mind-blowing for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think there's something really, really important in what you're saying and what we're all saying. There's a difference between hybrid work and hybrid collaboration. And I think we want to pull those apart and understand them uniquely. Hybrid work might be, I can work in multiple places, and maybe when I'm away from the office, I'm doing my rote work, my routine work, my alone work. And maybe when I'm at the office, I'm doing more of the creation and generative work. Hybrid collaboration is so fraught with difficulty right now. We don't have all the right answers to that. You know how this works, right? You've got the camera on top of the room and the remote participants are looking at people's heads and they can't see the thing you're writing on the whiteboard, and remote participants don't necessarily feel like they can get a word in edgewise. You people's faces equally. The people in the room get the chance for side conversations, which are productive and constructive. So that hybrid collaboration, totally agree, Pilar, is like the worst of all worlds. And we have so much that we can learn about the way that technology and place can be braided to make that a better experience. But I just think it's interesting to kind of discern those differences between hybrid working more expansively and hybrid collaboration. They're different challenges.
So it's
yeah, and hybrid, sorry, if I can just say,
yeah.
And then I'll shut up, hybrid collaboration and hybrid meetings are different. Because this is another thing that we need to start addressing, is that collaboration. I can collaborate with you and not spend any real time with you, because we have other ways, we can leave messages, we can build on work. And I think that separating those can give us a lot more options as well. So it's a good point. Thank you.
And let's be real, that meetings aren't the answer either. Just because I'm in the room with you doesn't mean I'm really there. And most meetings are horribly run, put together. They're not as productive as they should be. That's a whole other session to do that better.
It's an interesting point, and the argument that I would make there is, even though meetings may not be necessary for the topic at hand, the one thing that I do miss about in-person meetings was the ultimate focus. It is impossible or very difficult to get away with doing multiple things at the same time. So going back to what we're talking about at hand, which is the need for a distinction to be made between the working model and in this case hybrid working and hybrid collaboration. Even though we can kind of separate those into two different silos, is there not a direct influence on the collaboration model based off of what sort of working model was chosen? So, if I were, let's say I was working at Goldman Sachs, I would say, well, because we are 100% in office, there is not going to be that risk that we are having this collaboration mayhem of some people dialing in and some people there in person, and then other people just not accounted for at all.
Yeah, I think this is exactly the planning that we need to do. And almost like we need to be consciously competent about our processes in new ways. We can't take them for granted as much anymore. So I think teams need to ask themselves, for which of our processes do we need to be face-to-face? For which of our processes can we be remote? That's one layer of question. I think another then is, for which of our processes can we be hybrid? Those are two different kinds of things that we can ask ourselves. And I think the other thing we can ask is, what are the ways that we can have social norms that support all being in the office at the same time? Maybe we have new transparency about our schedules, not to the point that, it impacts my privacy, but if I'm going to be in the office, I want to know the three of you are going to be in the office as well if I'm going to make a commute. Or there may be ways that we can have core hours. We're all in the office from 10 o'clock on Tuesday to 3 o'clock on Thursday, and maybe that's when we kind of cluster more of our in-person interactions, whether those be meetings or dialogues or whatever those may be. So I think this consciousness about our processes, consciousness about the way that we interact with each other, and maybe some new social norms that feel a little systematic, feel a little mechanistic in the short term, but help us to really make hybrid hum.
Yeah. So I've got a question for you, Chris, directly, and this is kind of going to lead into a topic that I would love to bring to Pilar. So let's say that somebody comes to you and says, all right, we've decided that remote work is here to stay. It's something that we want to allow, where maybe before COVID it was something we would not even entertain. Is there a way to make sure that remote working is done right? What sort of advice or what sort of things should organizations be looking at to do it right? Because now we have time to think about it, whereas before it was just something where we had to grab our computers and take them home for an undetermined amount of time of remote work.
As Chris has dropped off, can I take that? We cannot rely on technology for real time.
I think certain points about collaboration are being proven indirectly on this now.
So going back to something you said about if before we weren't even thinking that it would be possible and we've never done it, You cannot underestimate that. I was on a panel the other, I was watching a panel the other day, and they said how important it is, going back to the questions we need to ask ourselves, where were we before COVID? Because our culture might not have changed that much. And so we might have seen this as a parenthesis. Hang on, where do we come from? So I think going back to what advice you would give is, okay, look at why that was before. Was it because of hierarchy? Was it because of trust? Was it because we hadn't thought of how to give people a chance to work remotely, because we hadn't thought of enabling them to furnish their homes in a way, because there are no co-working spaces nearby? You have to remember that there's a whole ecosystem built around remote work. Or was it for whatever reason? And then see what's changed and take it from there step at a time. So I think that even though we've changed a lot, maybe as an organization during the last year or so, let's just see what was going on and what has really changed, and then start to see how possible, going back to all the degrees that Tracy was talking about, of degrees of autonomy, degrees of location specificity, degrees of what does collaboration mean in this organization. So I think maybe around there.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. I love your analogy of whether this is a parenthesis or not, and those kind of degrees that we need to think about. I think that is going to be critical, especially in terms of constructive, productive cultures. I think employees are going to want to see that we've learned something through all of this and we're taking that forward. And there may be new openness that we can bring to our willingness to try remote work. As we think about hybrid and making hybrid work, one element is going to be fairness. If we look at third-party research, fairness is critical to people's state of mind, their engagement. There's so much research that people will disengage if they don't feel fairness. And across a study, really interesting study by Erasmus University, across 60 different cultures and societies, found that fairness was one of our fundamental human principles. So people need to feel like there's fairness. And Chris made this point, right? It doesn't need to be equal, it needs to be equitable. I think another thing is going to be that the decisions that we make from a hybrid standpoint have to be principle oriented. Let's establish some principles and then be super transparent about those principles. So we're not making kind of one-off decisions that feel arbitrary to people. We're making principle-based decisions. I think another thing is that we're trying and testing and experimenting and willing to learn, and knowing that what we have today will need to continuously improve. I think we need to give people access to leaders, because when people feel more access, they feel less kind of, competitive with each other for things like recognition and promotions. And we need to help build team bonds, because that will also be really critical to making hybrid work. So those are some of the things that occur to me as the things that will be critical for hybrid to work well.
And Chris, bringing this back to you. So again, somebody makes the decision that, okay, we are going to allow remote work, maybe in the past where they hadn't been open to it at all. How can they go about doing it right?
Yeah, I think it's a point of, Tracy made the point of maybe getting schedules on a similar pattern. And then we also have to understand, like, if you're a knowledge worker, where's your productivity best? So like, I know I need to do deep work quite often. So being in an office and having someone knock on my door would not be appropriate for that. I do my creative work, I think Tracy would agree with this, out in nature. Like, I have my best ideas for writing and speaking when I'm out walking in nature. So I make sure that's a part of my schedule as well. So the way to get the hybrid work, really, a lot of it comes down to trust in the manager, right? And in the leadership. We talked about focus, but trust is really that foundation that we need to start on. And we need to be able to, at the Workforce Institute, we just did our most recent research. And I say that because it was in the fall. We have another one coming out next week. But in our most recent research on trust, we understand that people trust their organizations more than they trust, like, the government and the media. And so employers and managers should be making that conscious effort to continue to build trust with their employees, and employees doing the same with the company. That allows the hybrid model to work better, because now you're not applying software that's going to screen capture my desktop every 10 minutes. Because is it about how many hours I'm working, or is it about how productive I'm being? because that's a lot of different things, right? And I see that someone just wrote in that the work from home blurs the boundaries. It so does. I'm lucky enough that I have an office right now in my home. If this were months ago, you would see kids running around the background. I have 4 kids. They would just come on in, even if I told them I was on a presentation. They would walk in once in a while, and we see into people's lives. And so my work on work-life balance helps with the hybrid model, because we have to allow employees to set boundaries. Do you shut your laptop, close your door when your day is over? Right? That's the habit I've been getting into, is that after a certain time, I just have to be done. I've got to be able to pay attention to my family and give them my whole self, because my life is important as well. And that revives me to come back to work the next day.
And what you're kind of going back on this point, what you're mentioning and what Tracy also mentioned is something that I have not heard enough in previous conversations, which is the role of leadership. And the question I'd ask you first, and I'll bring this to Pilar and Tracy, what is leadership not understanding? What are they getting wrong about this? What are the big pitfalls that you would advise them to avoid?
Yeah, so everyone knows I have a whole remote team. We've been remote before the pandemic, and we're remote now. I will agree that there are some things that are easier to get done when we're in person. So I have the whole team getting together next month just for 2 days, because in 4 hours, we can knock out a project that would probably take us about a week virtually. But being together will help. But what I think, this is what I speak on all day: trust, work-life balance, and leadership. What leaders, I believe, are missing is they feel like they're listening to their employees, but are they really? That's the topic of our next research that actually will come out this month. Is the employee voice really being heard? And how do you communicate that from leaders? Leaders also need to get to know their employees. No longer can we just wait for an employee to come to work and we just know their work selves. You see into my home right now. I see into Tracy. I know that's her office, but right, we can see into people's houses. And so we can see what's going on in the background. So we know a little bit more about people. That doesn't mean we should be prying into their lives, but we should get to know them to increase the trust, to increase it increases productivity by building relationships. It's a huge factor, and leaders need to be able to get on the ground and do that. One of the ways, I'll tell you, it was when I was a college student, and I've actually recommended this to our own company this year, but our president of the university used to get together once a month with not the same student leaders, but there used to be like a rotation of student leaders. They would come to the president's house for dinner, and then she would just ask him, what's going well? What can we do better? And just listening to them. I would say in a virtual environment, leaders could have something like this, a real small focus group of employees from different areas, and just listen. Let them talk and tell you what's going on. You'll learn a lot more. And it's almost like walking around your office when you're back in the office, right? Like that's the same kind of a thing. Get out of your office as a leader and walk around. When I was director of HR at a university, walking around the university was the best way I heard what was happening from the employees. They would see you. They know who you are after a while, and they'll wave you down, run after you in the hallway because they want to chat. They want, someone said it. Someone said access. They want access to their leaders.
It's a survey is not enough. The job doesn't stop there. And Pilar, from your experience, what are leaders getting wrong about this? What questions are they not asking?
I'm not sure they're getting it that wrong. I hope that a lot of them will get it right. As in, like Chris was saying, it's difficult because on the one hand you want to take your time and make sure you're listening and doing everything, but on the one hand people want to be told that there's something happening. Like you were saying, Chris, earlier, we want to stop. We want a consistency for a while. We want some stuff to be things to happen and move forwards. So I think that as well as that real listening, and also I think even at the same time, huge self-awareness. As this anecdote, something before the pandemic, talking to someone, they were saying, oh, my husband, he's a manager. He doesn't trust people to work from home because he knows he can't work at home. And even it's this experience that maybe they've had what has worked? What has worked for them and why? And are they assuming that that will work for everyone else? So I think that really listen in all kinds of levels and with all kinds of different people, as well as we're saying in the organization, and then huge self-awareness to really stop and see what assumptions they're making about others, because they've got that themselves as the main point of reference.
Yeah. And
such good points. I love that. You know, the thing I would add is I think one of the things that leaders get wrong is I think they are not always wanting to ask enough questions. We know statistically when leaders demonstrate more empathy, people report greater levels of mental health. They feel attended to. They feel like somebody cares, like somebody's paying attention. And I think leaders don't need to pry. They don't need to go all the way to TMI, too much information. In and asking questions is a big deal. I think another thing that leaders can get wrong is that they can give people too much space. Like, you know, they know that you're dealing with, you know, online learning, or they know you don't have childcare, or they know you need to figure out your elder care, or, you know, whatever those personal situations are. But people appreciate being held accountable. They want to know their work matters. And so I think another pitfall can be giving people too much space and not reminding them of that overall purpose. I think another thing that leaders can underestimate is the importance of their presence and accessibility. We know when there's greater perception of presence and accessibility on the parts of leaders, people feel greater senses of community. They're more likely to be retained at their organization. They're more likely to be engaged. And this is to some of Chris's points too, right? Management by walking around, but that accessibility is huge. The last thing I would say has to do with I think a lot of times leaders underestimate their effect on people. And to a great extent, leaders are becoming a single source of truth, right? People feel inundated with information. They're not sure what to trust. And so they look to their leaders. And, you know, leaders may walk in the morning or log on in the morning and, you know, have a grumpy face on, maybe because of something that happened completely outside of work, but people may interpret that. And so it's kind of like that old movie, The Accidental Tourist. I don't know if the movie was that awesome, but
it's my father's favorite movie.
yeah, I love the concept of like, it's kind of like accidental leadership in some ways. You don't even realize how much people are focused on you, focused on your responses, focused on what you're saying. So love the point Pilar was making too. If you're really reflective and self-aware, you can also manage that, right? Which is classic EQ.
Mm-hmm. Can I go back on myself? Sorry, because just listening to Tracy has taken my mind. That one thing that I have seen leadership doing wrong is not using the technology in a way that makes them, going back to Tracy's point, more accessible. So I have seen town halls happening where the chat was closed. I've seen town halls where it was just one person talking at the camera rather than let me give you a video of 10 minutes for you to consume and let's make this an open forum. Because the one thing that, going back to online meetings, that technology can do, it can bring a lot of people together that otherwise might be difficult to do. So I think that even at that level, to really understand what technology can give us, so I think sometimes that's been missed by the people who are not having to use it as much.
Mm-hmm. Needs to be two-way.
Oh, sorry?
So, yes. Yeah.
It needs to be two-way communication, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Because guess what? If you're not listening to your employees, they're going to put it on Glassdoor or whatever other review sites out there, and they're going to knock you for it. It's just the way it is now.
Yeah, that's the reality of how things go now.
I call it the Yelpification of our companies. Where you just review everything.
That's a very appropriate analogy.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've kind of played around with, you know, dissecting the different models, the different options at hand. But, you know, one thing that would be helpful is to kind of look at the situation that we'll all be facing, regardless of the individual models that companies or organizations may be going for. And I think it's fair to say that, like, as a species, we've kind of been through something over the past 14 to 15 months. So, you know, regardless of that working model, how are companies going to help bring their employees back in sort of a mental or a spiritual sense? How are we going to help people overcome some of the mental and emotional strains that everybody's been through over the past months.
Yeah, I think for me, yes, we've all been through something similar. I call it same storm, different boats, right? And so this idea that, but how do we bring people back? Trust. We need to think about safety and security, whether that's physical, mental, that you cannot just not think about that. We have to think about, because people are going to come back to work and wonder, is my coworker vaccinated? Do I have to wear a mask? Why, if I don't, why not? Like, these are all questions that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the safety of ourselves needs to be at the forefront. And while we have to answer it for us, our companies should also be answering for the employees, because otherwise people are going to be skittish or scared to come back to their office, the return to office in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a really big part of bringing people back is going to be addressing some of the mental health issues. Like, it literally every single week there's another study on the deterioration of mental health and people feeling levels of depression and anxiety and social isolation. And I think the good news about that is that we've potentially reduced the stigma of mental health and we can start talking about it. But I think that when companies focus on people holistically and think about not just, what are they doing with their hands and their minds every day for us at our company, but who are they in the bigger picture? That's a big deal. So, so that idea of kind of addressing mental health and then thinking holistically about the skills and ways that people need to develop. We surely have developed our resilience as a society, but we also have this opportunity to kind of think about innovation and think about, I like to say, from the biggest barriers come the biggest innovations. And so this has been so disruptive that we can think about developing people in terms of the way that they're thinking entrepreneurially, the new skills they will need in dealing with ambiguity, the new skills they will need in building rapport quickly and as we get back and rebuild our social networks. So to think holistically, to be straightforward about mental health issues, and to really support employees in lots of different ways and set clear expectations for the kinds of results that we're looking for in the unique way people can bring their talents forward.
Yeah. And let's see. I believe is Pilar also frozen for everyone else? I was going to put the same question to her. Okay, no worries. And as we're, I'd like to leave ample time for questions. So if people have questions in the audience, feel free to again put those in the chat box or in the Q&A section here, and we'll try to get to those at the end of the discussion. So in the spirit of wrapping things up, we've talked a lot. We've bounced around subjects. We've gone into models and things like that. Is there? Oh, Pilar. Okay, wonderful. So I would like to turn things back here. So before we get into that last question, so Pilar, how do we go about bringing people back? So particularly if we're talking about a remote first or a remote only kind of situation, do we make some kind of distinction between COVID times and the way that we worked or the way that we operated then and the way that things are going to be in the future? So, in that sense, how do we bring people back even if we're not physically bringing them back?
I had actually said that I didn't have much to add because this is,
Okay.
but it's a very interesting question that even if you are 100% remote, there has been a huge difference between, and Chris, you don't need me to say that. So I think that it does help. It does help to say that was what happened, but what did we learn from it? I think it helps to mark the different phases and to give we like closure as well. So I think we can do that but always honoring what's been learned and experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I used a couple of terms there that some people may not be familiar with, but that I believe you've been involved with. So what's the distinction between remote first and remote only?
So remote first means that your company is ready so that the remote worker does not feel excluded. As in, you could run the company tomorrow and everyone could be remote, and you wouldn't, well, of course you would notice it. So if we're talking about a company that has a hybrid workplace setup that is remote first, it means that you're always thinking of the remote people, that they're not excluded, which might happen. You could also have that the office people are excluded. Remote only, I would imagine, is a distributed company where everybody, there is no headquarters, 100% distributed. Whereas remote first, you can have a headquarters, you can have different satellite offices, but there's more of a mindset as well.
And are there companies making the decision to go remote only at this point in time, or even before COVID, or has that kind of been somewhat experimental?
Yeah, there were some. Well, we have huge companies like, well, huge. Automatic has more than 1,000 people. GitLab as well, loads of employees, and you tend to find that they are spread globally, so they take advantage of that. So they exist already, and right at the beginning of the pandemic, a few months in, there were some companies who went, okay, smaller companies especially, we don't need that head office. We'll sort out what we do afterwards. And I think what you've seen as well is the co-working spaces have also grown alongside this, some of these decisions as well. So yeah, it's rare, it's still rare, but it's not unheard of. But they have a very different mentality. If you're fully distributed, you operate in a very different space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is good to see that there's some, first proofs of this of this model.
And sorry, and just for viewers, if you Google Buffer, they have a blog that it's not about social media, but it's about how they work. Distributed by Matt Mullenberg. He talks about how they work at Automatic. These companies, because they have transparency as one of their core values, they share a lot of their operations, so you can learn a lot from them.
Yeah, excellent things to check out following this session. So, as we're coming towards the end of things, I always love asking this question, and I'll put it to you first, Chris, and then move to Tracy, and Pilar, I'll give you the last word here. So, we've bounced around subjects, we've taken a lot of topics on in this short amount of time that's been allocated to us. Is there anything that we didn't say here, didn't ask here that needs to be asked? And taking that a step further, is there anyone who's being left out in this conversation?
Yeah, I think to me it boils down to the employee experience and the benefits to the company. How do we create a great employee experience that has, a lot of things we talked about, the trust, the great employees deserve great managers, right? A lot of times our managers, when they're put in those positions, they were good at making widgets, whatever you want to say, but and then if they're not good at being a manager, we say, let's give them some training. And a lot of times with training, we get it in our minds. We go, okay, that makes sense. That's a good manager. But to apply it is a different story. So we need coaching for our managers. We need to go a step further. And so these ideas, these are the things we should be thinking. To me, it boils down, forget employee engagement. That's great. That's a great, metric. But employee experience, if you can look at the journey of your employees, where they interact with the company on the journey, think even a time clock, punching in and out. That's an experience. Is it a good one or is it a bad one? Do they have to wait in line with everybody else for 5 minutes to punch in because you only have one clock for a whole facility? Or do you have multiple? And it can go as far as vacation, or asking for time off. What does that process look like? Is it a piece of paper, or now you have email and that's technology? That's not, where we are with AI now, the system can approve it. You don't even need the manager's approval if you set the boundaries correctly, right? So I think it comes down to the employee experience and what do you want them to have as we go back to the office or we stay remote, whatever that is. They have to have a great experience if you want them to stay with you and be productive, no matter what you choose.
Yeah, great points. Tracy, what or whom is being left out of this?
What we haven't mentioned yet is happiness. And my new book is The Secrets to Happiness at Work. So it's very much on my mind and it's kind of my current lens. But it's so interesting because Happiness has business benefits documented. It's critical to people and individuals. It's critical to results, both at a business level and a country level. And I think it has everything to do with this idea that work doesn't have to be drudgery. Work is part of a full life. And this moment that we're in has made us conscious of how we work, why we work, with whom we work, how we prefer to work, where we prefer to work. And that level of intentionality and realization about our work gives us such an opportunity. I think we really have the opportunity to reflect, reset, reinvent how we think about work and life and how those come together, and how we create the conditions for happiness for ourselves and for our companies and for our employees. And all of those have both agency and structure. Individuals have responsibility for how they work and their happiness. Companies, societies, communities have those responsibilities to create the conditions as well. But I think we can bring together this idea of both joy and work, and really through this reinvention, we have a new opportunity to do that.
Yeah. So on top of all of that, if I can say who is being left out, I just want to go back right to the beginning where Chris and Tracy both talk about flexibility. And it's the fact that the hybrid workplace gives us a choice of location, but the flexibility might not be around location. And I think it's really important to remember that, or else lots of people are going to be left behind. And it also takes me to the what is we haven't talked about. And it's the fact that remote work does not mean working from home. It has mainly meant that even before the pandemic. It's definitely meant that during the pandemic. We've got to start looking at, again, co-working spaces. Near home offices is another term. And getting the choice between, someone came on the 21st Century Work Life podcast a few months ago, and they were talking about the experience in Guatemala. And they were saying you're having a choice of working in very bad home conditions with lots of people, or having to travel for 2 hours. We want something different. So again, I think there's that would be great if we can also crack that one on top of everything else.
And it can depend on what you're doing, like I had talked about. It depends on what you're trying to be productive at.
Yeah.
That dictates your environment for a lot of folks.
Yeah. And we don't want the people who cannot work from home being left behind, being able to choose the best way of working. It is very complex, but I think we're at a great time to start thinking about this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely a once-in-a-lifetime catalyst for these kinds of conversations. I don't think we'll be, hopefully, knock on wood, we won't be seeing anything like this ever again. So I think if there's no questions from the audience, and I'm taking a look just to make sure that we've kind of addressed things. So there's one in the chat here, I think happened a little bit earlier in the conversation. I believe it was when you were speaking, Tracy. So the figures of 5% being in full remote, 72% being in hybrid, and the rest being in the office. Do you know what the territory was for that study?
Mm-hmm. That was global. Yep, that was global. That was and it was you can access the research at steelcase.com.
Oh, great. Okay, wonderful.
Yep.
Wonderful. So we've still got 2 minutes. Any sort of plugs people would like to make here? Any recommended further reading or things that the audience can check out?
Gosh, that's like a silver platter opportunity, Mike.
I'm happy to go.
I aim to please as a moderator.
You can certainly jump on, connect with me on LinkedIn. The workforceinstitute.org is where we put out a lot of research. We just launched a new podcast, or relaunched our podcast this week on human resources. And it's a 20-minute podcast every other week on specific topics with some of my team members that I have doing that. And it should be really, really great. And I think I've already worked with Pilar and love it and appreciate having her. Tracy, it sounds like you and I need to do something together, because I talk all about work-life satisfaction and my research on work-life negotiation, and it sounds like they kind of cross over.
Yeah, that would be really cool, Chris. I love it. My new book is called The Secrets to Happiness at Work. My previous book is called Bring Work to Life, and it's about alternative ways to think about work-life balance. You can reach out to me at tracybrower.com or on LinkedIn, Tracy Brower, PhD. And steelcase.com is tons and tons and tons of resources as well. So would love to connect.
Great.
For me, just say hello on LinkedIn. Be lovely to be connected.
Yep.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you so much for the audience for your attention. And thank you so much. I think we've got some interesting weeks and months to come, and we'll be seeing a lot of organizations kind of putting their bets in as to which model they're gonna pick. So this is very interesting stuff. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.